When walking in the woods, the last thing people expect is to discover one of the biggest mysteries in the area. However, sometimes this is unavoidable, and the least expected people end up encountering a phenomenon that could even cost them their lives. Such is the case of a group of young people who decided to enter the thick forest of Cisco Grove in 1964, a placid and quiet place that during the night became the home of a creature that continues to be one of the greatest mysteries of the U.S. to this day. Would you dare to know it? Then it's time for you to join us on a journey back to September 4, 1964, and learn the story of Donald Shrum. In California, music is always playing on the beach. The popular city of the eternal summer was already famous in 1964 when the hippie movement, the protest against the Vietnam War, and the fight for free love were about to be born. However, apart from the splendor of this paradisiacal place of crystalline beaches, there was Placer County, a small urban area with wide expanses and nature around it. Children grew up next to nature in this county. Children were born and grew to adulthood to the rhythm of the trees. And on September 4, 1964, Donald Shrum was already a man. At 28, he was an independent adult who revived his youth with his childhood friends every weekend. They all had their lives and responsibilities, but for 48 hours, once a week, they would forget the world to go camping, hunting, and enjoying time in the company of old friends. That day, Donald Shrum and his friends went to Cisco Grove, a wide meadow covered with thick trees and abundant animals. The excursion was different this time. Far from using rifles or firearms, the group had decided to take bows and arrows. This element was a good incentive for the group. Despite having traveled to that place during their whole lives, they had never hunted with a bow, and they all knew that it was not as easy as just pointing and pulling the trigger. So, the friends traveled and got to Cisco Grove in the late afternoon. Joking and laughing, they walked along without stumbling upon any prey, except for a few squirrels and birds that escaped immediately. That was strange. Usually, the forest was full of all kinds of animals. By 4 o'clock in the afternoon, they had no doubt that something strange was going on, but that did not discourage them. They decided to set up camp near a creek and were on their way there when Donald noticed something that would change that afternoon's hunting forever. He heard a deer close to him, so he sharpened his hearing. He was sure that he had heard it, but his friends denied it. They assured him it was a figment of his imagination. Of course, Donald was an expert hunter and could not allow them to doubt him. So, amid laughter and a wager, he told his friends to go to the creek and he would catch up later with a good deer on his shoulders. No one could have imagined what was about to happen. Donald moved northeast, following what he believed to be the footfalls of a group of deer. He moved slowly, without making too much noise, into the lush forest. No matter how far he walked, he could not find the animals. In fact, he not only didn't come across the deer, but he didn't see any other living creature either. He was obsessed with catching them. His ego and his pride were at stake, although, unbeknownst to him, soon his life would be too. After several hours, the sun began to fade on the horizon. Darkness was slowly advancing, and Donald had moved farther away from the campsite than he wished. He had not managed to catch anything, although he kept hearing footsteps and soft sounds that made him feel that something was lurking in the area. Defeated, Donald turned back to the camp, but the night was running faster than he was, and the absolute darkness blinded him. He couldn't see practically anything. The black sky hid the moon and stars. The darkness covered everything, and he could do nothing to avoid it. This was dangerous, so he decided to sit near the trunk of a leafy tree until the clouds cleared. Fortunately, it was not cold, but Donald had undoubtedly got himself into a serious predicament. He knew that his friends would not be able to find him. Going back to where they were would be really difficult, but everything was about to get even more complicated. After what felt like an eternity, the night was still intact and the clouds did not allow the moon's rays to light up the place. However, a silvery light suddenly appeared in the distance. The flash moved in a zigzag as if it were hurtling against the earth. Everything was quiet and nothing seemed unusual, but almost without being able to explain it, the hairs on Donald's body stood on end. Out of nowhere, he had a strong feeling that he was being watched. He was in danger. He felt it in his heart, so he got up from the ground and climbed the tree using all the strength he had. He climbed without looking down, puffing and suffering, and with a lot of effort he reached a great height. He leaned against one of the tree's thick branches, and when he looked ahead, his life changed forever. The light appeared again in the distance, but this time Donald could see what was emanating it. It was a shiny metal cigar-shaped object. It was about 14 stories high, and from it a smaller craft emerged and descended to Earth. Donald was perplexed, petrified. He could not believe what he was seeing. He remembered the bow on his back. He was comforted by the thought that at least he could defend himself, but when he heard the sound of approaching footsteps, he was no longer so sure. The sound was getting louder and louder. The leaves rustled, his breathing accelerated, and then he saw them. There were two humanoid entities that were over 5 feet tall, with silver attire and thick glasses. Between them, there was the closest thing to a robot from a science fiction book that Donald had ever seen. It had glowing orange eyes, moved mechanically, and its footsteps sounded like a can full of nails. Donald watched them perplexed as they approached. He tried to keep silent, but it was useless. The creatures had already detected him and began to hit the tree. They were shaking it frantically, trying to knock Donald down, but he was much more adept. He pulled out his belt and tied himself to the tree trunk with a strong knot. Then he pulled out his arrows and started shooting, but it was useless. The darts bounced off the silver skin of the entities. The creatures seemed annoyed at what they would be forced to do in order to catch him, but they did it anyway. A strange gray smoke ascended through the air to Donald, and he lost consciousness instantly. When he awoke, sunlight was shining directly into his eyes. He felt nauseous and his body was weak, but down below, the creatures were still lurking around him. When they saw him awake, they released the gas again, and Donald passed out again. The same thing repeated for 2 whole days. When the sun rose on the 3rd day, Donald was on the verge of death. His body was numb, and he was dehydrated, hungry, and delirious, but he was still clinging to the tree. That is how the rescuers found him, on the verge of death. After his recovery, Donald took his story to the U.S. Air Force. He had an uncanny ability to describe every detail of what happened. He told his story from beginning to end, but naturally, no one believed him. How could alien forces not have been able to pull a man down from a tree? It was ridiculous. But Donald was sure of what he had seen, and his story made it to the local media. His account became popular among the locals who were used to encountering UFOs in the surrounding woods and meadows. Thus was born the legend of the alien robot of Cisco Grove, although many people far from consider it a legend, faithfully believing that it was a real event that has repeated more than many would like to admit. If you also believe that aliens visit us more regularly than we can imagine, perhaps you would like to learn about other mysteries that have occurred on our planet. If so, join us to discover 5 mysteries of space that could have chilling answers, or space monsters found in the deep ocean. Would you dare to know them? Then, in case you are brave enough, check out these videos.